Well, good morning, everybody. Lovely to have you join us on this Wednesday morning. My name is Julian Keselman. I am the founder of startBUILD, and of which the broader group of which you're all members. startBUILD is a community platform that supports emerging entrepreneurs, many of which are on the call today, and a few of our panelists, which you'll hear from. So emerging entrepreneurs that are working in the real estate sector. So anywhere within the value chain, from construction, of which we'll be hearing about today, all the way through to sales and leasing, asset management, energy, basically anything that you can think of in the built environment, we support founders in that area. In my day job, I'm the program director for RealTechX, which is a later stage growth program that supports real estate technology businesses to engage with industry. And you'll also hear from some of the founders participating in that as well. Really, today is the first of a series of engagements which we're hoping to run for you all on the future of the real estate sector more broadly. We've run startBUILD in each different state previously, so more as a kind of typical community meetup, and the current crisis has forced us all together, and we're delighted to have this be a national representation. There's about 1,500 members across the group, and about 150 people registered today. So great to have you all join us. Today's session, because of that number of registrations, we've set up as a Zoom webinar. So for the duration of the session, you'll be a participant, which means you don't have your audio on or your video on, meaning you can allow the kids and the dogs to run wild in the background and stay in your PJs if you so choose. But it also means that the way we'll ask you to engage with our panelists and speakers is using the Q&A function, which you'll find at the bottom of your Zoom platform. So you can post questions in there. I'll ask them of each of our speakers, either during their talk or at the end of their talk, and that'll be the way that you can kind of relay all of your queries and curiosities. And similarly, there's a chat function as well, so you can post some comments, post some ideas, and really links to anything else which you found interesting as part of this talk. And look, a really good way to get started, as we can see from Kurt, Carola, Trish, hello, good morning to you all, is to introduce yourself, say hi, tell us where you're from, what company you might be running, and which part of the country you're dialing in from. I think that's a really nice way to get started. So the session today will go for 90 minutes, so get comfortable, get a cup of tea, and we'll have the pleasure of hearing from all four of these speakers. So I've had quite a long relationship with a number of the speakers here. So Dan, Rachel, and Matt are all part of the RealTechX program that I run as my main role. And Rachel has been involved with startBUILD from the beginning. She's the chapter lead for South Australia, and we know from our experience visiting all of you in that market that it's a very close-knit community. So I'm sure you'll know Rachel. And Matt Likwa is from Eunomia, is a co-founder with Matt Barbuto, who was the founder of startBUILD in Melbourne as well. So good heritage in this group. And look, we're also pleased to welcome Adam Ferguson, the co-founder of SiteHive. He's going to be one of the youngest businesses, but also incredibly promising. So I'm happy to have him join this group of speakers. As I said, it's going to be a 90-minute session. So the speakers will each talk for about 10 minutes, giving you a bit of an introduction to who they are, what they do, and really how they see their role in growing an early emerging business and shaping the future of construction. So they'll talk for about 10 minutes. Then we'll have some time for Q&A, which I'll manage. And they'll also have a chance to ask each other questions. So we'll have a bit of a panel kind of backwards and forwards as well. So with that, I'm about to throw to our first speaker, but I thought I'd give our view of where we are in the construction maturity cycle from an innovation and technology perspective. So where we've come from, where we're at today, and what the future might look like, and give a couple of principles which we think are quite informative on how we might get there. So what you're looking at here is a picture of a construction site in Toronto in 1918. All right, so this is taking you back just over 100 years. It was post-World War One, and the whole Northern Hemisphere was impacted by the Spanish flu, right? Something much, much more severe than coronavirus that we're experiencing at the moment. The flu impacted 500 million people and caused about between 20 and 50 million deaths, right? So absolutely ravaging. I guess the challenge was back at those times, we didn't have the same understanding of health and safety. Hospitals weren't as advanced, and also our understanding of epidemics was not that great. And so you can see on this construction site, workers toiling very manually in close proximity to each other. No wonder that that was such a devastating pandemic. So let's fast forward to today. All right, so this is a view from a construction site in Australia during the coronavirus, right? And this was post the government mandating that construction was an essential service, right? But also that social distancing should be maintained. So construction in Australia is very much an essential service. It's one of the largest employers after health, education, and retail as well, and contributes enormously to the economy. So if you think from a general contractor to subbies and trades, all the suppliers, and then the kind of flow on multiplier that happens from construction, huge economic impacts that come through. But of course, the government deemed that it was possible to still maintain social distance on a construction site. So for the industry people that are on this call, you'll know just how hard that is, right? So while these tools were a little bit more advanced than what we saw 100 years ago in Toronto, still there's real reason and a need to be in tight proximity with each other. So that's today, right? But what if the future of construction looks more like this, right? So what if construction in the future looks much more like advanced manufacturing, which has huge levels of automation and robotics, and we could build buildings in the same way that the cars are being built today, right? So it's a very different future, which allows us to maintain safety in times like this, create enormous efficiencies, and really shore up the sustainability of the industry. Again, for all the industry people on the call, you'll know that this future is a fair way away. So how do we get there, right? There are a couple of guiding principles which we think are really key. So number one is that everything that can be digitized will be digitized, right? And so what I mean by this is that information is the most simple thing to digitize, right? Turning insights and information into bits and bytes, right? And we're already starting to see this in construction in small ways. So if you think about it at a project level, project communications and project management is starting to be digitized, but step onto into any site office and you'll still see reams of paper and paper all over the walls, right? So not at the same levels of digitization that some of us white collar folks see. If you get down to a site level, some critical risk measures are starting to be digitized. So health and safety, environmental monitoring, quality assurance, as some of our speakers will tell you today, in the infancy of getting digitized, but incredibly important to be able to keep accurate records of those controls and governance, given how the types of risks that they pose to construction workers and to projects at large. And so you go from a project management level down to a site level to an actual construction work level, right? How much digitization is there actually happening from a Internet of Things devices on the work that's being done on the ground, right? Or how tools are actually being used. And compare that with something like mining, where everything is tracked and optimized to the nth degree. Construction has a very, very long way to go. But ultimately, we believe this digitization will happen everywhere because there's great economic incentives to do so, and it'll inform much smarter construction into the future. And then, of course, everything that can be automated will be automated, and it has been in manufacturing. So buildings are just large-scale manufactured products, right? And what we've seen in manufacturing is huge amounts of productivity improvement through automation, through robotics, and other process improvements. And in construction, in 50 years, some estimates say that we've seen no productivity, right? So 50 years is halfway between where we were with the Spanish flu and where we are today, and there's been absolutely no uplift when the rest of the world around us has changed so dramatically. So our view is that these two things will occur and occur over time, and I'm really interested to hear from our panelists just at the rate at which they think these are going to start dropping into construction sites near you. So with that backdrop, it's now my pleasure to welcome our speakers to talk. I think we're going to jump forwards and invite Rachel Kidwell, who's the founder of TC Pinpoint, to share her view around communications and how, in a retail context, improved communication tools can speed up those final stages of delivery. So Rachel, I might hand over to you.
Thank you, Julian. I'll just share my screen. Thank you, appreciate that. Look, initially my topic for the presentation that we set 3 or 4 weeks ago involved the word COVID. And during those 3 weeks, my inbox and our general discussions have been overloaded with the term. So with all due respect, I've undertaken a little bit of a reset and have decided to delve into a couple of slightly different yet really relevant topics. So bear with me as we move through some adjustments. And the first one of that that I wanted to talk about today, particularly as CEO and founder of TC Pinpoint, and across my life experience, I've ascertained my superpower. And that superpower is planning. And look, whether that planning be a process for a working holiday around the world in my 20s, or a wedding, founding a business, growing a business, it's the planning skill set that time and time again has worked in my favor. And over my years of running businesses in retail project delivery, my experience has proven that the power of planning within a complex environment improves the outcome by virtue of completion of those projects successfully. And as we move through this presentation, I wanted to heighten the importance of planning and empathy across the delivery of projects, and how TC Pinpoint is assisting our customers to do exactly that. Particularly at a time where uncertainty is evident, we're living with it, and as humans, we're re-evaluating what our new normal will be. And now more than ever, we have a gift of resetting, providing us with time to plan and be ready for what will be on the other side of this. So let's take a retail development as an example. It's a complex process to take an environment from this plan, or in fact, just to get to this version of the plan, to deliver a fully complete base building with retail tenancy fit outs, ready for trade and triggering rental income for our landlords. Based on my experience of undertaking the tenancy coordinator role within complex retail developments and operational environments, the complexities were paramount when it came to stakeholder engagement and understanding who needs to do what and when. Multiple stakeholders had many inputs through the project's delivery. What they do and when they did it is intrinsically linked to enabling other stakeholders to complete their tasks. And look, some of you may be aware of Atul Gawande's The Checklist Manifesto. I know that Dan certainly is, and he will talk to some of this in his presentation as well, whereby Atul investigates a number of different industries and their application of process and procedure. He iterates that under conditions of complexity, not only are checklists a help, they are required for success. And he goes on to say that there must always be room for judgment, but judgment aided and even enhanced by procedure. In the book, Atul cites the entertainment industry and an interesting example of David Lee Roth's memoir. And I wanted to just read you a little bit of an extract from the book, because I think it's a cracker when we look at applying similarities to the construction industry. So bear with me as I read an extract from the book, page 80. So Van Halen was the first band to take huge productions into tertiary third level markets. We'd pull up with 9 18-wheeler trucks full of gear, where the standard was 3 trucks max. And there were many, many technical errors, whether it was the girders who couldn't support the weight, or the flooring would sink in, or the doors weren't big enough to move the gear through. The contract rider read like a version of the Chinese Yellow Pages, because there was so much equipment and so many human beings to make it function. So just as a little test, buried somewhere in the middle of the rider would be Article 126, the no brown M&M clause, where I would walk backstage, and if I saw a brown M&M in that bowl, he wrote, well, we'd line check the entire production, guaranteed you're going to arrive at a technical error, guaranteed you'd run into a problem. The mistakes could be life-threatening. In Colorado, for example, the band found the local promoters had failed to read the weight requirements, and the staging would have fallen through the arena floor. So the similarities here to the construction industry are really clear insofar as technical complexities and safety concerns. Procedure and process is paramount. This also leads me to my second theme of today, which is a really deep topic of empathy. So I'm just going to touch on it lightly for now. And some of you may be aware of Brené Brown, who is the queen of empathy, and I'm a huge fan of her research and teachings. Brené cites that empathy is the skill or the ability to tap into our own experiences in order to connect with an experience someone is relating to us. In the complex environment of construction, backed by the influence one person's task can have on another, in my experience, the more you can understand and empathize to your fellow stakeholders, or some of the other roles that I've used in this example with you in the middle, and what they need to achieve, the better final outcome for the project. And this is what TC Pinpoint is doing for the industry. We're providing a collaboration and process planning tool to be the central depository for all of these stakeholders. And why are we doing it? Well, we're doing it to bring property people together to work in an environment where the process is clearly set out and understood. And look, in today's environment, we know that the way people work has changed for good, particularly in these times, with the application of remote working as well. So people are looking for outcomes, not necessarily ownership, customization, not generalization, innovation by default, given the level of disruption that the world has experienced, and not the status quo. We're effectively replacing these archaic Excel spreadsheets, and we're moving the industry to an intuitive, cloud-based platform enabling users to have an overview of project completeness and the ability to assess risk based on project status. Effectively, what we're doing is combining 3 disparate tenancy delivery tools onto the one platform. So for example, process management, which historically has been represented in Excel spreadsheets, document storage, utilizing examples like Dropbox, and of course, communications, historically it's been email. So this then enables a return on investment for our customers by virtue of informed decision-making and shorter timeframes, triggering rental incomes for the landlords, improved communication, removing complex email trails, and aligned stakeholders, enabling management of intense and complex workloads. In fact, the use of TC Pinpoint on the Adelaide Airport Terminal Expansion project recently showed a return of investment by way of increased transparency of information across stakeholders and future risk mitigation with tenancies also opening on time. In fact, over 1,400 documents are now easily accessible and not lost in people's inboxes, providing increased property valuations and improved governance processes. 2,167 emails to inboxes have been avoided, further heightening efficiencies and transparency in the tenancy delivery process. And over 69 stakeholders actually were able to readily understand the influence their actions had on others involved in the process due to our customizable and repeatable workflows applied to the project. So in effect, TC Pinpoint enables the reliable management of complexity to be routine. And this is the impact that we want to leave on the industry, implementing a superpower of planning, process, and empathy to create that one version of the truth for your projects. And if anybody on the webinar today is keen to learn a little bit more about us, you can jump onto our webpage and request a demo. We'd be really pleased to take you through how our tool is currently being applied on different projects.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Rachel. Look, I might take the opportunity to ask the first question, then I can invite our panelists if you have any questions. And for everybody else on the line, there's a Q&A function at the bottom of your Zoom. Please post your questions in there and I can pick them up. So Rachel, you've been working in this space for quite some time. So before TC Pinpoint, you were a tenancy advisor and have overseen some fit outs. Can you give us a sense of what happens when this process goes wrong and communications fail? What is the kind of chaos that ensues?
Look, we've had a couple of examples whereby we've had contractors on site working to incorrect latest versions of plans. We've had terrazzo floors cut up in food halls that were outside of lease lines because they are working to a hand marked up plan. And, you know, these kind of examples are part and parcel of the reason of ensuring that every stakeholder understands the impact that their tasks have on other people in the process.
Yeah, most definitely. I'm sure those terrazzo floors were an expensive mistake. And obviously, you know, expanding out from the retail delivery into a construction space, those types of retrofits and reworks are incredibly expensive. Look, I might turn it to our other panelists, Adam, Dan, or Matt. Do you have any questions for Rachel to get underway?
Not at this point, Julian, but look, I really enjoyed the presentation, Rachel.
Thanks, Adam.
Yeah, Rachel, I've got one. As a sole co-founder, I've wondered how you found that that journey and kind of navigating it on your own.
Look, it hasn't been easy, but I don't think founding a company and growing a company is easy, whether or not you're a solo founder or you have a co-founder. I think there's pros and cons to both. I'm a huge advocate of making sure that you surround yourself with people that are experts in their knowledge. And I think it was Einstein that said that you don't need to know all the answers, you just need to know where to go to get the answers. So that's certainly a theme that I certainly run my decision-making process with, as well as, you know, really honing in on what your own gut instincts tell you at any given time and trusting those gut instincts. And being part of, you know, great cohorts like RealTechX and the startBUILD community, where you can really connect with others that have gone before you and you can learn on their journeys as well.
Great, thanks. And so there's you know, Dan will speak in a minute, and kind of his solution is much more geared towards trades and contractors on a site writ large. But you're dealing with some pretty specialist, you know, fit out contractors. What has been the receptivity to working with a digital solution, right? So if we, you know, and we can hear from Dan in a minute about adoption rates on a site, building a building, but for your specialist type contractors, what has that process been like, and how have you had to, say, influence their kind of pickup of the solution?
Look, the support from our clients, as in the landlords, makes a really big difference to the rollout of any type of digital technology, ensuring that you've got that executive level support really driving its use. It's then up to us to make sure that we're designing a platform that's user-friendly and has great user experience. I can cite one example of a tenancy at Adelaide Airport, a very large global company, and their pickup has been fantastic of the platform. We've had stakeholders from their leasing executives through to their services engineers, their architects, all engage on the platform, sharing documents, communicating, and we're still in the design review and approval stage of that. But the expectation, as with other tenants that have fitted out at the airport, their shop fitters also follow through by virtue of accessing documents and communicating with us on the platform. So it's a really wide and varied stakeholder uptake, which is exactly what we need for the successful rollout of the platform.
Yeah, most definitely. It's a pretty diverse set to get that all going. We've got our first question in from Simon Hayes. Simon, thank you very much for getting us underway. He says, Rachel, I'm interested to hear who have been your main customers or the ones that have been eager to use TC Pinpoint.
Thanks for the question. We've been working with companies like Fort Street Capital. They've been with us for over a year now. They've got a number of retail assets up and down the East Coast. ISPT's IRAPT portfolio are also engaging with the platform. And Retail First out of Queensland, they've rolled TC Pinpoint out across their Australia Fair property.
Brilliant. Any last questions before I might throw one more to Rachel, and then we can pass on to Dan. Any other thoughts from you out there? Okay, so I might ask a question. Rachel, how long? Obviously, this is well within your focus, but how long do you anticipate it's going to be before the level of digitization you're encouraging is going to become standard in retail deliveries?
Look, I think the events over the last few weeks has, without a doubt, increased people's general digital knowledge and understanding of, what a browser is, how do I download Zoom, how do I integrate digitally, which is definitely working in our favour. And people have had the time to not be so busy moving in and out of sites and in and out of other types of project engagement to really sit and review best case scenarios moving forward for how they may continue to engage. And the world needs that. I mean, we need to be more flexible and open to utilising digital products, particularly at the base level, processes of communication and sharing of documents and information. So I'm really positive around the speed at which the adoption of digital technologies will increase over the next 6 to 12 months compared to, for example, the last 3 years since we started.
Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, we've seen such an uptick in the tailwind. I know firsthand, my parents had never ordered their groceries online before, and now they're completely addicted to it. And I think that there's a tailwind that happens when digital non-natives start using digital tools in their everyday lives, and that just raises capability for the workplace. So
Yeah.
Rachel, thank you so much for kicking us off and also being such a big contributor to the community.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Everybody on the line is muted, but I'm assuming there's a rapturous applause happening in the background. Thank you. Excellent. Well, look, it's now my pleasure to invite Dan from Conquer to tell us a little bit about his journey. Dan's one of 3 founders from New Zealand. We've managed to pull him over the ditch, and he's now relocated with one of his founders down into Melbourne. So welcome. Happy to be in ISO with you. But Dan, so Conquer is a solution that supports quality assurance on construction sites. So very keen to hear about your journey today, Dan.
Awesome, thank you. I'm just gonna Can you guys see the whole screen there?
You can.
Oh, wait a minute. Yes.
Oh.
Is that presenting the entire
Yeah.
thing?
Do the side slides now.
Oh, right. Okay. Hold on a second. My apologies.
Need to get that jazz music back on.
Yeah. Okay. Can you see that now?
You can.
Is that you guys can't see my notes?
No, everybody's ready.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Cool. Good morning, everyone. I'm Dan. I'm one of 3 co-founders of Conquer. Thank you, Julian, for the introduction, and to Sana and the startBUILD team for inviting me today. It's a real pleasure to be speaking to you all from my new home in Melbourne, and a privilege to be presenting alongside these other awesome founders. And to give you a background on Conquer, we are a quality assurance software platform for the construction industry. We help those on site to improve their work and to document it. We then enable them to share that live and reliable information to drive action on projects for a number of various reasons. We've got a team of around 30 in the business, with offices in Auckland and Melbourne, and over 300 customers across Asia Pacific. Today, I'm hoping to cover a few things that you'll learn about quality assurance and checklists, important context to understand what we do, and then how we built a construction software business when the 3 of us co-founders didn't have any construction or software experience other than doing a bit of laboring in our teens, and why this has ended up being an advantage for us. So here's me, I'm on the right in this, there's Barney in the middle and Pete on the left. And we were all friends from high school. And one of our other peers from high school had done, in our early 20s, had done quite well in technology. He'd started a business without a software background that provided a software solution to a segment of the market. And the reason that he had done quite well was by looking for problems in the B2B space and then solving them with software. So with that as inspiration, we decided we wanted to start our own software business, and we went looking for problems. We'd emailed a lot of people about what their problems could be, and we had some rather terrible ideas, but ultimately it came from talking to our friends who were site engineers, and they'd gone through university and done civil engineering and were working on projects, these large highway, motorway jobs, and they were complaining about quality assurance, or QA. And so our first question was, what is quality assurance? And it's basically a process that is done by those who are doing work to get it right, to make sure they don't make any mistakes. And it's typically done with checklists. Now, checklists are a powerful tool, and much like Rachel has highlighted with her quotes from the Checklist Manifesto, I'm going to do a similar one. But this kind of speaks to the core of the problem of what the checklist is trying to solve. And so to quote Atul Gawande, we are besieged with simple problems. It's not the failure to figure it out, it's the failure to remember when things are somewhat routine. As humans, we get distracted, we miss key steps, and these lead to failures, sometimes life-threatening ones. And that's really the core of what QA or what checklists are trying to achieve. They're not paint by numbers. They're trying to compensate for the fallibility of human memory and attention. And in this book, the Checklist Manifesto, and they ran a study where, much like you would write a checklist for your supermarket, or that they use in aviation or construction, they implemented one for surgical practices. And it was a checklist that detailed the simple things, making sure that the patient didn't have any allergies, the anesthetic had been administered, they knew which side of the patient they were operating on, the routine things. And this pre-surgery checklist had a dramatic impact, and it reduced death rates ultimately by 47%. So these checklists are very, very powerful when they're done. And so what we did, once we learned about this process of QA, we researched it. We would cold call sites, this is just over 5 years ago, and ask them if we could come and talk to them about this project that we were doing on quality assurance. And it was typically we were talking to at this stage, and this was the kind of key, and it was somewhat inadvertent. I won't say it was all done by design, but we started talking to the people who were doing the work. These were site foremen or site managers and project managers. The main reason behind that was because they were the only ones who would talk to us. The senior executives or what have you weren't interested in talking to three guys just out of uni. But through this process, we got a good understanding of what the problem was. And the problem for site teams was that QA was not easy. The status quo is that it's done on paper. You put yourself in an environment where your 10 floors up pouring concrete, you're trying to coordinate all these trades, and then your checklist that's supposed to help you build it correctly is sitting down in the site office and has yet to be printed out. So what was ended up happening is that most of this QA wasn't being done. It was being sort of signed off at the end of the week, tick and flick, as they would say, to verify it for a compliance perspective, but it didn't have any impact on the work, which meant that there's mistakes in it. And for the owners of the business, their problem was that it was being done retrospectively. So they were just paying people to falsify documentation in many instances, and it led to problems and, you know, eats into their productivity because of their mistakes. And this problem turns out to be quite a big one. According to the Chartered Quality Institute, 12% of a project's value is lost to rework, which is a very big number considering the construction margins that exist. So with an understanding of this problem, we went looking for a software developer. And where do you go? We put an ad on Facebook. There's a small startup ecosystem Facebook page in Auckland where we're all from, and we put an ad on there saying we were looking for a developer. And luckily we found one who built in ultimately the right tech stack for us, but who is more importantly prepared to work for a living wage and some equity. Sometimes hard to find developers in that realm. So we borrowed money from who we could, and we started building the solution. And the solution to the problem was to make it easy and make it simple for people to do QA. That's really the core of this whole thing. It's a behavior element that is just burdened by the fact that it's manual and poorly designed. So much like Rachel highlighted, the importance of planning, that's the first step we take. We plan it out for our customers. This is a screenshot of a project for a head contractor or a builder's job, where we've mapped out the stages and workflows that they're going to be going through, with the end point being the activities checklist. And the activities checklist is completed on the phone. Now, this site app is ruthlessly simple. There's only about 6 things you can do in this. It's navigating to the checklist, passing things off, making comments, taking photos, requesting sign off. And that's the key to this whole thing, is that you've got to cater for the wide range of users. So those very first people we spoke to who said it has to be easy, it has to be simple, really informed the core of the product right from the beginning. And it's ultimately led to our success in getting traction across the board, because the people on site actually engage with it, and it can deliver on what we say it can in the sales meetings. And the awesome part about QA, which we didn't quite realize at the time or have in our vision, was that because QA is a time sensitive activity, once it's been finished on site and things have been checked off, you can start to use it for much more than actually doing QA and improving the work phase. It's now a live status tracker of exactly where things have been signed off into for a project. And so that can start to transform what can happen on site, how information flows can happen on site, and also the work that's actually happening at the hands of the people who are doing it. So Conquer takes a ground up approach, and this has been the key to our success, right from those first phone calls that we made back in 2015 to now. Talking to the people on site has been the real key. And we've got some good results. This is Wilson Plumbing and Drainage. They are one of Victoria's premier plumbing contractors, and they've seen an 80% reduction in rework since they've started working with us. But it gets to become an industry solution, and one that benefits everybody when it's driven more holistically on a project, either by the client or the builder in contract. It starts off because everyone wins when the trade gets it right the first time. But everyone also wins where they can have access to that information and that live status, rather than having to go to the work phase to verify it's complete. The trade contractor sends that information to who needs to see it, it gets verified, and then you call the next one in. And Multiplex, who also run this job, have had similar, it's annoying how close these two numbers are, because they sound like we made them up, but that's what came from our customers. They've seen 80% fewer defects when 2 comparable trades were using Conquer on a project. So the industry transformation we're trying to achieve with quality assurance, this kind of core and somewhat initially boring process that people view, is about getting it right in the first instance with simple QA, then using that information to track the live status of work, using that information to verify payments in accordance with that work, and then increasing productivity. And so the lessons that we've learned and the reasons for our success which kind of come down to these three things. It's understanding your customer's problem, and you'll hear everybody in a startup world or any business world talk about this. It's really key, and for us, it was about its cause. You can talk to any property developer or any building contractor, and they will say that they hate defects. And there's dozens and dozens of defecting tools out there to help snag and close those out once they've been done. But the cause of it is that QA was this paper-based process that wasn't valuable to the person on site. And so it wasn't able to help to compensate for the fact that they can get distracted and mess things up sometimes, as we all do. So the cause of this problem was really important for us to understand. And luckily we were at an agent stage where we had the time and patience to just cold call and do this research quite intensively. Staying focused is the other one. Because we didn't come from the industry, we weren't aware of all the plethora of issues that face it. We were able to stay focused, particularly on quality assurance, and we have been pulled in various directions by customers asking us to do various things and expand our feature set into different realms effectively. And every time we've done that, it's been a mistake. Staying really focused and being really good at what you do is a real key to this. And we believe that the future of the construction and the real tech space will be one that's best of breeds, much like the construction subcontractor market has become. It's best of breeds, which will integrate. So that's a real key thing for us, is staying focused and staying niche, and particularly what you're doing. And then listen and learn. It's a fast-moving environment. We would never have got to where we are if we didn't listen to our customers and we didn't learn and make mistakes quite quickly. So if you make mistakes, learn from them, implement the solutions, and stay agile. But that's really the key, is the mistakes that you make in these instances will end up being something that benefits everybody else in that vertical, because they're all kind of in the same camp and same realm. So finally, to kind of close off and speak back to Julian's first points, for a long time to come, much of construction will still be done at the hands of people. We want to enhance those people and then to reliably inform everyone that they're working with when they're done, so that these people can get paid and then they can get the next one in. For an industry that's been starved of productivity increases, where we pay 12% of a project's value for things to be done twice, we believe the solutions lie in making things simpler. And so that's our business and our story, and Conker's vision. And there at the bottom is a construction industry driven by quality. I'll stop sharing here and pass back to the floor.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Dan. And I think, those lessons around you guys learning as you go, saving a lot of people on site, also learning much more costly mistakes, hopefully. So what I love about your presentations is the substantiation by numbers is always good to see. So 12% variance and rework on a site, and you've got a customer that's capturing 80% of that potential benefit. With an industry that's running on net margins of sub 5%, you would think that the maths just stacks up, right? So how easy or hard has it been for you to make this case around the impact of QA and better QA on sites?
That's a really good question. I mean, now that we have numbers and case studies that we can point to, we're in a much better position to point to these. Our biggest challenge is the cultural one. And so when we were coming at this from the beginning, it was kind of, you're speaking in aspirations, how this process should work and the evidence you can pull from other industries. But yeah, much like any business, status quo is the biggest competitor that we have. And the status quo for this is that QA doesn't mean anything to most people, because it's never delivered the outcomes or it's never been useful. So we have to say, okay, well, we can make it useful for the people on site and bring them on the journey and show why they need a checklist. Why do they need that in the first instance? And then why should the business then pay for it? So it's a challenge, I think, and we can now start to point to the success of really reputable businesses who are achieving these results, thankfully. But it was a bit of it took early adopters. It took customers to take a punt on what they thought this would achieve in the first instance, and that's been, I guess, the hustle that we've had to do.
It's brilliant. So we've got a question from an anonymous attendee, but I presume they're going to want to connect with you afterwards after this question. How do you think about partnerships with other platforms and technologies who are also providing digital enablement tools?
I mean, we're open to them, as I said in that in the presentation. We're like super focused and niche on what we do. We would be, you know, I don't think we'd go far unless we start to look at horizons where we are partnering with other businesses. And I think many people in this wider ecosystem need to have that approach. So yes, we're quite open to it.
Yeah, completely. I might throw to any of the other speakers if they've got a question for Dan. Otherwise, I've got a couple more up my sleeve. Any of you guys want to ask Dan a question?
Dan, just curious, from my side, you know, you require quite a bit of digital penetration on site. You know, the users doing these checklists, I assume, are subcontractors or tradies and stuff like that. What you know, what's it like, I guess, in terms of adoption, uses of device? Like, has that been an area that you kind of win people over and they see the benefit and take on, or is it like that cultural piece you referenced? Is there something around that? But
so what's been our adoption like at the coalface or the site level?
Yeah.
Once they start to use it, it's generally pretty good because we've designed it to be really simple and relevant to them. We have instances where QA can be overscoped. So you'll go into the supermarket, you need to get 5 things, but someone's written you a checklist that has 30 on them. You probably won't engage with that. So part of the key is guiding our customers under these principles to make sure it's going to be useful for that person on site, because if they're thinking this is something that's not there to enhance them, then they're unlikely to engage, no matter how simple our software is. But yeah, once it's been, if it has been designed well and usefully for them, the uptake is generally quite good. Like, we've got a range of users from the age of early 20s who've just come out of who are cadets, up to people who've been placing Rio for 50 years and they're in their 70s. And that's the kind of, probably one of the things that we're most proud of is the fact we've got that capability at the range at the coalface. But it went straight back to the start of where we came from, of making it simple. And that's kind of been the really key thing for that side app interface.
So we had a questioner kind of ask a similar question. So beyond UI, what other strategies did you use to find those early adopters? Were there bacon and egg rolls for early smokers, or anything? Any tips or tricks that you could share?
To getting the very first customers. I mean, you just got to. We tried a lot of people. I mean, we're quite privileged. The 3 of us started in the business in New Zealand, Auckland, the age of mid-20s. A, you can live with mum, but B, like, Auckland's a town where people are very well connected, and so the first customer we got was someone through a friend's dad, you know. So you use whatever connections you can get to get in front of people and have them take it seriously. And at that day, it was like our first customer was paying us $50 a month for a project or something like that. So it was like, it was negligible. The risk for them was that it just didn't work. But yeah, the lucky part is that through that research process, we developed a bunch of leads that we could then go back and go, hey, if we built this for you, would that work? And there was a real iterative process right throughout the development, where it wasn't just like research, build, come back. It was like every time we had something, we were trying to sell it, which was basically an opportunity for us to get feedback on it. And so after about sort of 5 months of the very first bits of development being able to be showed, we got some traction. And once you get one customer, it becomes just slightly easier.
Yep, beautiful. That's, I think, following the very classic kind of startup way. So we've got 2 more questions and we might wrap it up. So again, Simon, thank you for being a regular contributor. Is there a need to customize for each construction project? And do you need to do this, or can the customer do the kind of customization?
Good question. It depends on the complexity of it. So we have some customers who are completely self-managing, and we don't have to interact with them at all unless they need some significant changes. And then there's the bigger jobs, like the high skyrise ones, where we will work with the teams to implement it, and we charge a setup fee for that. So it's a bit of both, and the probably where it lies more often, is that we have to work with the customers to set this up. But in reality, if it was low touch in the first instance and we weren't there to help sit down and map it and scope it, it probably wouldn't get done. And so it's kind of been a key part for us to get traction in the first instance, is to help customers go, here's how you map it out, you know?
Yeah, that hand-holding in the early goings is crucial. So I had a little observation from Rachel, and then we'll wrap with the final question. Rachel, did you want to add?
Oh, yeah, look, it was more about the importance of identifying a problem and then building the solution, which the Conquer team have very clearly done, as opposed to building a solution and then trying to find the problem that you're solving. So I think that's a credit to the team insofar as, you know, being very clear on how to approach it, and not coming from the industry, you know, the level of, you know, interviews and questions and, you know, that real inquisitive nature that's so important to have as a founder, or founders. I think it's a real credit to the team. So well done.
Thank you, Rachel. Yeah, the one thing I think that it's been an advantage is that we haven't really had much of an availability bias. So like when you're working in something, like my favorite anecdote around this is, like, many people will live with other people. They always think as an individual they do the dishes more because they're aware of the 100% of the time that they do the dishes and only part of it what the other people do. And that's a psychological bias. And so because we weren't in the industry and aware of everything, we were able to just take the feedback and aggregate it and go, okay, here's what seems to work for most people, and we'll build that. So we didn't design something fit for one customer, it was fit for everybody. So that was an advantage.
Beautiful. And so with our final question, so Conquer has really, you know, been set up to be a tool with a very simple user interface that can be used by trades right at the moment. And obviously there's quite a way to run before that change flows through the industry. Our questioner has asked, are you developing capabilities to incorporate augmented reality to compare to as built to BIM? So, you know, looking out to the next horizon, what's in the pipeline for Conquer?
I mean, it's on the radar. I wish I could say it was in the pipeline, but our roadmap's pretty, like, sort of well defined at the moment, and it's not, you can't look too far ahead. But that's certainly, I think, where things will be going, is that augmented reality will be something that is on a lot more people's phones, particularly as 5G and the other capabilities come out around this. And to conquer at those stages, we'll have to look at, like, how we can drive the behavioral elements and improve the workflow and fit in around those models as well. But I think that's on the radar or on the horizon more so than in the indirect pipeline of work.
Sure. Well, look, Chris Kais has left a comment saying HoloLens. So I think you've got your first beta tester there for when you guys are ready to go. So, beautiful. But Dan, thank you so much for sharing your thoughts. Really appreciate it. And yeah, hopefully gives a good sense to all the early stage companies out there what a good initial discovery process can look like, even from when you're outside of the industry.
Thanks, Julian.
Thanks. So next, it's my pleasure to invite Matt Likwa from Eunomia. Eunomia was actually one of the first portfolio companies that Taronga Ventures put on, so we've known them for quite some time, and looking at a little deeper technology to start that tracking down at a site level. So Matt, over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Julian. It's a pleasure to be here, and thanks everyone for joining. It's great to see such a wide array of industry professionals and people interested. So hopefully I've got a little bit to touch on for everybody. You can take away a bit about how Eunomia sees the future of construction. So the slide you see here, aside from our mission, which is connecting the things in construction to amplify human potential, we see the future of construction being beyond just digital, the fact that you've got access to the information and the movement. If you look at construction and what it really is, it's a lot of disparate resources trying to come together to build, as Julian mentioned earlier, manufacturing in essence. So the coordination of those different components, you know, the advantage that the automotive industry has, obviously, is that you know, they're able to house all that within one roof. The challenge in construction is much greater. So the ability to connect all those moving pieces is really what Eunomia is about. And so we're trying to attach sensors, essentially. So we are what would be common in vernacular or buzzwords, IoT or Internet of Things. So we use embedded systems and networks to capture the movement of materials, resources, and assets, or potentially people, for certain uses within construction. So that's on and off site. The picture here is actually one that has quite a bit of relevance to me. It's the first pieces of facade panel that we tracked from a factory in China to a site in Melbourne. And so on the left, you see the actual installed pieces. And on the right, the photo of a screen capture of essentially the digital visualization tool we used, a 3D model, to represent the states of each individual facade panel as it was moving through the supply chain to site. And you can see the blue ones kind of matching in the shape there to the ones physically attached to the building in the picture, which is really interesting because it means you're now connecting to a supply chain that, I'll speak to another slide about connecting, the previous ways that this was being done was very Excel based. And now, you've got a real-time view into what's really happening across, the on and off-site activities. Eunomia is a Melbourne-based business. We were started in 2018. I have one of 3 co-founders. We now have about 18 people that we have, so mostly developers. We're all Melbourne-based. We have one colleague who spends his time in the UK. He's back in Australia right now, given all the global situation occurring, but so that's an outpost we have. Our vision really is about making construction the highest performing industry in the world, and that seems like a pretty lofty goal, but when you think about, if you're familiar with any of the McKinsey research or articles published around 2016 around construction and the industry in general, you're probably familiar with kind of the ranking of construction and agriculture quite low on the digital scale. And that's seems quite odd, I guess, to us because, so much, not only financial investment goes into the built environment and food and agriculture, but how important those pieces are to, take a look now at the changes in the world. You can recognize what built environment and agriculture has from importance. So we really focus our values on collaboration, trust, impact, simplicity, and focus. And these are areas that, from a technology standpoint, it's really important, actually, we recognize to really identify, and it takes a while to come up with vision and values, and that's always kind of subject a bit to kind of evolve, but it's important to have those pieces, not only for your customers and outward reflecting, but also inward reflecting, because these are the things that you use to build, your tools, your software, the applications which you provide. And having that as a guiding principle, I would say, for any other entrepreneurs or founders out there is certainly, to echo kind of what Dan also mentioned, is really key to kind of going about that problem focus and solving. So, and as I mentioned, one of the things, an aphorism that our CTO would really be happy to see on a slide for me, no one buys technology. We buy the time and cost savings associated with the simplification of complex and costly tasks. That project that I mentioned earlier, tracking of facade panels, what we call high value material tracking, one of our first projects was tracking from China to Australia, 5,000 facade panels. And that was previously done kind of connecting through maybe a once a week Excel update. And that changes when you've got a real-time view of what's actually happening on a factory floor. So take a COVID situation happening in China. For a site coordinator to be able to look upstream at a supply chain and be able to see pretty quickly within 10 minutes, looking at a dashboard, what's in stock, what's on site, what's been manufactured and what's it been like, what's sitting in inventory and ready to be shipped in China. To get that kind of view, to be able to do planning and task oriented, is really kind of the way we see the future of construction, being connected to that physical world, so that you're able to make decisions in better timing. The other thing I'd say is, it's one way to look at technology is you can simplify complex tasks, and digitize processes that already exist and make them simpler. One of the things that we've found, at least the application of our technology, a sensor-based tracking and location system, is that oftentimes you can sell for the 95% of the times that people are interested in improving a process. But there's a flip side to that, in that there's also interest in the 5% of times when things are not going well, when actually having that information makes a huge difference. So you can also look at technology as a product to serve kind of different use cases. And in an environment like construction, where risks are tried to mitigate through different contracts and complex structures, there's a real kind of need, I think, within construction to have technology that serves multiple purposes in different environments. So I think that's really important. So what do we mean by connecting the things? I think sometimes people get, it's easy to go off with technology and vernacular and concepts like IoT and Internet of Things, but in basic form, if you take this user as a yellow block on the left, we've developed a mobile app that allows you to take small sensors like this, perhaps, so battery operated, they survive for maybe, depending on the use case, up to several years in an environment. And so you can attach these to physical objects, and using gateways, or in some architecture, depending on the use cases, we use different beacons to provide location sensing, an actual location. You can set up a network to kind of capture. So whether that's on site or off site and dedicated supply chains, it's about simply being able to deploy beacons that we use to track on to put in the environment, and tracking tags to go on things that we're interested in actually seeing where they are and how they're moving. So what we then do really is track, monitor, and locate in real time. And so I've got a bit of a video. Maybe this will help. If you look at this, this is a screen capture from some testing we did at one of the sites. And so the green dot is actually a phone, and there's a yellow sensor that I think I had with me as well. Those other yellow sensors, sorry, I don't have a better a video here I'll play in a second, but you'll see that those are kind of moving within the environment, and that's essentially what we do. So hopefully this plays. But yeah, so this is one application where you can use, where you could actually put, so the purple dots are the beacons, yellows are tracking tags, some of those are stationary. But essentially this was really just to give you an idea of what we're able to do, is provide, in some ways, on one level, location. What I mean by location is GPS for an indoor environment, in a sense. Like by loading up plans and locations, you can deploy beacons and define a gate or a particular area of interest, or a floor, let's say, and cover the entrance and exit, so you can see kind of what materials move into that area, or yeah, whatever is actually of applicable use. And so going back then to kind of what Eunomia and how we see the vision of the future, construction is a very complex industry with a lot of, every project is slightly unique. Trying to break that down into individual tasks, you get to a level where you see, and our focus is predominantly on vertical construction, but the application and technology that we have about, again, going back to focus, there's applications for horizontal or large construction infrastructure. Our focus right now is really on connecting vertical, where there's economies of scale to be able to replicate an efficiency of moving goods up and down vertically. And so, we see this connected job site eventually being the intersection of all these different activities and, different trades, and the ones that matter most. So, Pareto principle really applies here, being able to measure what matters, the 80-20 rule. The things that are going to drive project success for a construction site are often, sometimes the same, but often for a job, maybe only, 20% of trades are really the ones that you want to be able to help coordinate and move. So we see, an ability to find a way to define what's worth tracking, and then take that across, whether it's, assets and site logistics or materials and supply chain, and to be able to coordinate those with a connected system. And so by connection, what we see is really the aggregation of multiple levels of pieces of information, so multiple trades coming down. We're working right now on a product that we call critical path tracking, which we're doing with ISPT and ProBuild at the Victoria University, a site in Melbourne, CBD. And in that site, we're tracking facade panels, again, from China. We're tracking a safety component. One of the largest, highest risks is falling objects in construction. And so a lot of the exposed areas and the need for structural screens at the top, you see in that middle photo, is really around monitoring the operational safety zones underneath those. So knowing when those screens are jumping, knowing when those hatches that are kind of separate the edge of the building and the screen are being opened and at risk for falling objects. That's a checklist type of situation where people want to go sign a zone out. They're going to take responsibility for that. There's no real connection right now to how long hatches are actually open and what's that risk exposure time. So we're able to connect with the Eunomia system, essentially not only the movement of those screens and their jump up, so it's tracking the status of that, but also when are those hatches open and were they signed off and were they actually connected to the right trades at the right time, and we can drive alerts and critical notifications to operational teams around those types of high risk activities. So they can focus really on capturing data and connecting to those, which they don't really have now in any essence, just a form booking system, and then kind of drive that into a point where, better safety actually means better building. And then we're also adding to that structural pores and tracking of not only structure as progress, but also there's other third parties out there, concrete sensors, geotech. There's a lot of activity in slab and concrete curing and sensor maturity. And so integrating, that's another piece that we see as an option for a connected environment. There's no one way to win the entire connected job site. There's really kind of an integration and collaboration. So using perhaps other third-party sensors and being able to connect, we see Eunomia really becoming a platform for data aggregation and components. So not only the solutions and applications we drive, but then also being in and collaborating with other other construction tech companies to create really better outcomes for that built environment. So we've got just a view here then of those 3 different activities now, tracking those across what we visualize. We've got we're building essentially a 3D visualization engine and tool to capture the information and project status of all those different packages across a building site. So there's kind of one piece of information, and we're connecting those other third-party sensors. So that's mostly Eunomia. I had another, Julian, if you wanted, I could just go into the dashboard stuff that we have and show one of the project things if there's still time. I'm not sure how I'm doing on time, so you tell me.
We might take a couple of questions, and then how long do you think it would take, Matt?
No. I mean, we can do a couple of questions, or we can do questions, and I can do that at the same time. Maybe. Let's see.
Okay. Oh, Doug Vincent's asked for it, so let's go. Let's get straight into it. Thanks, Doug.
So this is a view of the ISPT project, the demo version. So all this data is actually is not real. This is just a demonstration project that our teams put together based on a model for that project that I just mentioned, where we're going to be tracking, we're already tracking facade and screens. And so you can see here, for instance, that we've got, we're able to kind of say, that this particular facade is in framing. That's at the factory in China. So we're able to isolate kind of the entire state of all the supply chain through these different things. You can look at it by level if you wanted and see the statistics here. There's to capture kind of all these processes across the entire supply chain, and then really break down some of the statistics. So this is a product that is still very much in its infancy and development. We're going to be integrating the structured screens to this view as well. So we've got other options to kind of bring in, you know, third-party sensing as well as our own applications into this to give kind of a connected information piece for a site team.
Great, thank you, and thanks very much for the demo. We've got a question which kind of runs straight off that. But what I'm going to do to make it easy for everybody is just launch a quick poll, which we can look at the results of at the end of the question time. So launching the poll now. So question is, how long will it take until we see real-time tracking technologies such as Eunomia on the majority of construction sites? Maybe not every touch point tracked, but just have some of these technologies on sites. And so we'll return to the results at the end of our question time. Although I can see Matt looking on very eagerly.
I voted.
Good.
Come on.
Awesome. So the question that flows on, I guess, from your demo was, has getting BIM models from builders in the right format from your platform been problematic? Do you need BIM models? Perhaps for the people on the call who don't know what a BIM model is, you could explain what that is?
Yeah.
How you'd interface.
Building information management. So it's more of a standard, I suppose, than anything else, but a part of that standard is really around how you store data within a model. So part of it is then the 3D component, but then also the layers of information. Like to the nth degree of BIM, you really got essentially the entire package of the design building, from, you know, specs of machinery, etc., to kind of who installed it or who the contractor and where things come from. So there's this kind of expanse of in essence, kind of the roadmap for digital twin technology. It's difficult. I would say that it's very much jurisdiction who uses 3D modeling, and the stage and state to which they're adopting that is probably very much around kind of regional specific. Also what parts of industry as well, like infrastructure, and a lot of government is driving the mandate for that. To answer the question specifically, it's not that easy yet. It's still kind of early days, I think. The benefits of that, the cost of that to maintain and do that is a hard one. But I think that as we see this connected ecosystem, to keep using that word, evolve, that'll become more and more reticent. I don't think there's any way that you won't be doing it, you know, within a few years. It seems to be, yeah, a must, I would say. It's hard for us, like there is some involvement. It's an additional cost for us to kind of develop that. So if a builder is interested, or developer is interested in that, then that's something we can pursue. And there's, you know, like anything, there's a simplification to that and getting the right inputs. But from an industry perspective, it's still difficult.
Okay, great. So mindful of time, we've got about 15 minutes. So I want to make sure that I give Adam a full chance to speak. What I might do is end the poll now, and then if you could just share back your reflections on the results. So end the poll, and it looks like a few people think it'll be within the next 12 months, a third within 3 years, about half within the next 5 years, and then a small amount of laggards. I think it's going to take 10 years to get us there. So Matt, what are your reactions to the results?
Yeah, I don't know. It's hard to say.
What did you
fully digitally connected is, yeah, I think the one thing I'll just end and close with, one of the things from a construction perspective, you know, what we do from technology, and I wanted to mention it to Dan earlier, a lot of this isn't just bolt-on. Like, it's not like the products that we're trying to provide become bolt-on. It's about like actually looking back at the business and saying, what do we actually need to do to change to adopt this actually? Because our business model now changes, especially with something like information, the amount of information we're trying to produce and provide. What are you planning to do with that? So that's a learning process. That's a process of discovery for our customers, and one that we're happy to go down, but it's also means kind of like there needs to be a change around the entire narrative and conversation of construction technology, that it's a dual thing and it's not just something you kind of go to the market and get.
Most definitely. All right, Matt, thank you so much for sharing the journey today, and thanks for everybody who chipped in. So for Adam from SiteHive, very pleased to have him joining us. So Adam has the newest company out of the group, but it's incredible to see what you've achieved so far, and we believe is going to be a very impactful solution in terms of environmental monitoring. So with that, I'll hand over to you.
Thank you, Julian. And I'll just share my screen. Hopefully that's coming up. Get the thumbs up from everybody. Awesome, great. So welcome everybody and good afternoon. And again, Julian, thank you for the opportunity to present a little bit about SiteHive and share with you our story and what we're focusing on. So we're SiteHive. We enable sustainable urbanism is our vision. And what this really means is we'd like to see construction progress, but do it in a way that's workable for inner city living. I think you speak to anybody and everybody, they've got a story about how construction's impacted either their work life or their home life. So how did we make that workable for everybody? And the way that we're going to do this is being able to measure and manage the environmental impact, particularly around things like noise, dust, vibration, air quality, etc. So our journey, where do we start? So Ben and I, who's my co-founder, we met at the Antler Startup Incubator. To give you some background on Antler, they a startup incubator that started last year. We were the first cohort. It was a 8-week program over June and July last year. And the way they set this up is that over those 8 weeks, you've got to find a co-founder. You've got to come up with an idea, and you have to then pitch to their investment committee to see whether they will give you some seed funding. So there was 70 strangers that came together over that period of time, working on a whole range of different ideas. And I've got to say, it was incredibly interesting, and the diversity and just the amount of smart people in the group was fantastic. And at the end of it, you have to pitch. So I often describe it to people, it was like 7 weeks of Love Island and a week of Shark Tank. And it did feel at times like I was part of a reality TV show, but I must admit, I did go in with a little bit of skepticism about the ability to find a co-founder over the course of 8 weeks. Seemed pretty far-fetched to me. But I was fortunate enough to meet Ben, and we started SiteHive, and we were fortunate enough to get seed funding from Antler. And what they're really looking for is a co-founder fit, and they're also looking for a product market fit. And they're two really key things, I think, as kicking off any business that needs to be right. For me personally, I was looking for a co-founder where I had aligned values, both in terms of personal values, but also in terms of ambitions about the business. I was looking for someone who had complementary skills. I wasn't looking for someone who was going to mirror myself, a clone, if you like. And I was looking for someone I could have a beer with on a Saturday afternoon. Because the reality is I'm spending more time with Ben than I am with my wife, though certainly the recent weeks have changed that a little bit. So it's been great to find a co-founder that aligned with the things I was looking for. And Ben, with his experience with Arup as a digital engineering manager and working on projects like Melbourne Metro, really came to Antler with an idea around environmental monitoring that excited me, something that could make a material difference. So if you're a budding entrepreneur looking for a path to a startup, I'd certainly encourage you to have a look at Antler. So environmental monitoring, let me just set some context. So the key factors here are things like noise, dust, air quality, etc. The regulatory compliance is increasing and seen a significant increase over the last 5 years. The likes of the EPA here in New South Wales are putting more and more demands on contractors to make sure that they're building in a way that actually is good for the community. Most of this work is outsourced to specialist consultants, so environmental consultants, noise consultants, etc. The monitoring equipment that actually does the actual monitoring itself is quite specialised, it's expensive, and a lot of the technology is sort of dating back 10, 20, even more years than that. So there has been I think hasn't caught up with a lot of the change in technology that's occurring now. And as I mentioned, the stakeholder scrutiny is increasing, particularly in complex urban projects. So there's multiple stakeholders in this. There's the clients and the communities, there's the consultants themselves and the contractors. So let me talk briefly to some of the challenges, because everyone's frustrated with how this is being done at the moment. So there's increasing expectations, there's increased work that's happening, and there's certainly heightened awareness. For the consultants that are doing the work, a lot of the data analysis is manual and time consuming. So they're literally taking data off a device, downloading it through a USB onto the computer, exporting that from a CS file to an Excel spreadsheet, and then starting to manipulate that data. Which goes back to Julian's earlier point that everything needs to be digitized, and there's lots of opportunity for automation. I've spoken to some of the challenges around monitoring devices, and all the exceedances that occur need to be investigated. And as the more monitoring that is occurring, we're actually discovering that there's more exceedances. Many of these aren't related to the construction activity at all, but it needs to be investigated. So that puts a big overhead on top of the consultants and the contractors to report on those. And for the contractors themselves, as we all know, they operate on very thin margins. So cost and risk is right at the heart of their concerns. They're dealing with increased regulation and scrutiny, and this leads potential to actually stop works if the community complaints are too high. And the cost of outsourcing this to consultants is quite expensive. Now, over the last few weeks, we've had a number of meetings with some environmental managers and talking about their own personal experience. They're incredibly frustrated. They're feeling the pain of having their budgets reduced. They're feeling the frustration of not being able to do the job that they're aspiring to. And they're quite fearful that what's happening on the construction site is breaking the regulation and putting the project at risk. So the pain is very real when you start to talk to the people responsible for this environmental monitoring. So this is where SiteHive comes into being. Like Matt from Eunomia, we're in the IoT space and we're building out a hardware solution, but we're also building out a software platform. Our hardware IoT solution, which I'll talk to in a bit more detail, measures noise, it's measuring dust, and we're also looking at some other sensors. And we're really using digital sensors to bring some innovation to the way in which environmental monitoring is done today. And then the data goes through to a software platform. And ultimately, an IoT device is a data capture tool. To that end, what we do with the data, the way that we present that information, the way that we analyse it and report on it is where a lot of the benefit comes from. So let me go into a little bit more detail. So here's a screenshot of an early design for our platform, presenting the information in a visual way, presenting more information than what they're getting. Things like direction of arrival and the last exceedance, which is information being able to deliver from a device. One of the key differences that we're coming to the market with is that we're taking in data from as many possible sources that we can, whether it comes from our hardware device, whether it comes from our competitors' devices, whether it comes from any data source whatsoever. An example might be the BOM data coming in to the platform to give wind direction to identify whether the dust that's being produced is coming on site or what the impact of the dust is occurring off site by the activity from the construction activity. So that's an example where we're trying to bring in as many data sources as we possibly can to give as much of a rich view of what's happening from the construction activity and the impact that is occurring. I'll come back to this screenshot in a moment after I talk to the actual hardware itself. So this is an early design of the IoT solution. It's not how it looks in terms of the end product, but it certainly gives you a bit of an idea of what we're building. This is effectively using electronics, using a bunch of sensors to be able to capture the information that we're after. If you look at the top sensor there, the round one, that's what's called a MEMS array. And it's what sits in a Google Home or an Alexa. This is a bit of technology that actually came from the military, where they were trying to identify where a gunshot was coming from. They could hear it, but where's the direction of that bullet coming from? That technology then made its way through to consumer products such as a Google Home. So when you think about a Google Home and you call out to it, it has to hear where that noise is coming from and respond to it. So there's 4 microphones sitting on that MEMS array, and it is able to identify the direction of arrival. It's able to measure both the decibel level, but also measure where that noise is coming from. In the problem space that we're trying to address, one of the challenges is we might have an exceedance on noise, but what caused that exceedance? Was it a truck that drove past the freeway that happened to be the problem? Was it a plane coming from overhead, or was it a digger on site? And that's part of how we're going to provide automation, is being able to capture this information digitally, recognize what that cause of that exceedance was, and be able to then reduce a lot of the work in being able to having to identify what that exceedance level is. And this is quite different technology to what's being used to do noise monitoring today. If anyone has seen it, you'll see a traditional analog type microphone out on site, most likely being held by an environmental consultant. In this picture, you can see a dust sensor, you can see a gas sensor, temperature, humidity, and even vibration. So when we think about the way the technology is changing and the cost of these sensors coming down and down, and their actual capability getting greater, this is how technology is enabling us to do things in a very different way. You know, we envisage a future where, rather than having 1 or 2 environmental monitors on a construction site, there might be 10, 50, 100 of these scattered across the construction site, all providing a rich data set to be able to provide a true picture of what's happening from an environmental perspective on noise, on dust, on gas, on vibration, so that the contractors have a really good idea as to what their impact is and are able to make sure they're staying inside the regulatory limits and minimising their impact in the market. So I spoke a little bit about direction of arrival, and you can see here the little graph in the bottom there, and it's showing where that direction of that noise is coming from. And this is where that MEMS array is providing the information coming in a digital format and presenting it through to the platform itself. To give you some case studies, so we've been up and running since August last year. We've running a number of pilots and we've got a number of fee-paying clients. So we've got a number of projects running with Ling O'Rourke, and a call out to Andrew Harris, who I saw was online from the Ling Innovation Lab. Thank you, Andrew. Your collaboration and support has been greatly appreciated, and we wouldn't have been able to get to where we are today without you and your team's assistance. So the first use case there is the level crossing removal down on Toorak Road. So we had a number of our devices down in Melbourne. This is an inner city construction work, doing a level crossing removal. And it was fantastic for us to see this idea of being able to have the direction of arrival. And what we extended it to was, if the noise exceedance was above 85 dBs, that we'd take a picture of where that noise was coming from. And what we saw was literally train after train going past the construction site. So we were able to prove with a high degree of clarity and accuracy that a lot of the noise exceedances on that particular project were occurring from the trains going past. Now, in the past, what would have happened is the Enviro consultant would have needed to have waded through many audio files and listened to those files and go, that sounds like a train. It must have been the train that was the exceedance. Whereas an actual visual image of the train going past, knowing exactly where that noise is coming from, at what level, provides a level of evidence that doesn't exist today. The second one there I've got was on the Sydney Uni project, where through the bushfire season, there was concerns for the workers in terms of their safety. And also, yeah, and that was the primary objective of the team there. So we put one of our devices on the top of the building there, and we were able to provide localized information in terms of the PM2.5, PM10, i.e. the dust level that was being caused from the bushfires. And really this is an unexpected use case where it was really addressing some of the work health and safety issues from that project. The last case study is with Western Sydney Airport. And this is an example where they're not using our hardware, but what they really wanted was a software platform that sat across all their environmental monitoring devices, which was able to then amalgamate all the data into a central repository. And we deployed a feature last week of being able just to download that data into an Excel file. What took about 10 minutes or even less to download that data saved a week's worth of time for the Enviro coordinator, who would have been pulling data off manually from each of these different devices and going through a process of consolidating that into an Excel spreadsheet before she was able to do the work itself. So really automating that information. So Julian, that brings me to an end of the slide deck. So I'll just pause there and throw it to you for questions or the audience.
Yeah, for sure. Adam, thank you so much. It's amazing to see where you guys have come to in the short time that you have.
Thank you.
So first of all, we've run a little over time, and that's on me. So do appreciate if you need to drop off, and thank you guys for joining. We look forward to seeing you at the next sessions. So my question to kick things off, Adam, so I'm thinking back to that slide with your exploded hardware and all of the different componentry, and any founders on the call that are involved in hardware know how hard hardware can be. So can you tell us a little bit about your approach to assembling the early versions of that kit?
Yes, Julian. My background has been in software over the last 20 years, so hardware is a new journey for me. And when people say hardware is hard, they really do mean it. And look, probably the biggest difference and challenge I've found is with software and just that whole transition from waterfall to agile, and that ability to iterate and confirm what you're building is the right thing for customers. That you don't quite have that luxury as much as you do in the hardware world. So look, we approached it from that mindset of how do we build something and validate it in market without over expenditure. To that end, our proof of concept device, which is out there on sites, we built using a Raspberry Pi and a number of sensors. So we effectively use off-the-shelf components to assemble the units. And really validate the need and the problem in market. We're now moving into the second phase of that, of building out a microcontroller with a view to building out a PCB. So we're still taking that iterative approach, still going from a sort of a lean startup mindset of how do we continue to validate what we're doing in market. And certainly as we've gone into market and getting more and more feedback from prospective clients and end users, we're validating our hypothesis. Fantastic. Yeah, obviously those iterations are infinitely more difficult when you're building things in the real world. We might just wrap up in say 4 minutes, I think. So time for a couple of questions. Maybe might open it to the panelists if you have any questions, or well, I've got two that have come through. One from S. McMillan. So Adam, any opportunities to identify different types of dust particles, for example, silica? The sensor that we're using at the moment doesn't differentiate between the different types of dust particles. So at the moment we're identifying dust 2.5, 4, 10, I should say 7 as well. So, you know, we are somewhat beholden to the sensor capability, but we're not looking to be sensor manufacturers. You know, what we're saying is that the capability of those sensors is getting better and better. If you take gas as an example, you can get gas sensors to identify lots of different types of gases. So I'd need to research a little bit as to whether we could do it something like silica. But if we can't today, then I fully expect that it could be something that's achievable in the near future. Great.
To our panelists, did you have any questions? I've got one remaining question from the audience. No? Okay, so the question was around what other types of data and sources you're able to bring into SiteHive. So perhaps, you know, from outside of your own hardware, what kind of third-party data inputs are you able to bring in?
Yeah, so look, we think data is the source of truth. So to that end, we're taking a very open approach to data coming from competitor products, third-party products, and we don't believe our sensor will, or our monitoring device will suit every use case. So to that end, our recommendation to many construction sites is to make sure they fit the devices for the right situation. So to that end, you know, we're at the moment bringing in the likes of Sandtech Noise, Thomson Dust, but we're currently working to bring in some water data, discussions around vibration. Ultimately, it's a data platform, so there's no reason that we can't bring in any data source. And then there's lots of API connections or data sources like BOM that we can bring into the platform. And in fact, we've already got the BOM data started to come through. So I think it really comes down to making sure that it's relevant to the stakeholders that we're serving, and that it's going to add more to the picture of what's happening to the actual construction site itself. But technically, there's no reason that any data source can't come into the platform.
That's fantastic. We're, I think, in this community, all fans of an open architecture. So very good. Look, with that, I might wrap up and say thank you very much, Adam, for sharing us your journey and your innovations.
My pleasure.
And look, for everybody else, thank you for sticking with us for an extra few minutes. Today has been a pilot for startBUILD. First time we've run a webinar online. We hope that you feel it's a successful pilot. We're very much open to your feedback for the upcoming webinars and the rest of the series. So in May, we will be running one on smart buildings. So how IoT and other kind of data capture tools are being embedded within assets. And then looking into June, we'll be running one on the experience economy in real estate. So what does technology mean for how we live in our homes, how we operate in buildings, in real estate, and in retail, and then indeed across the kind of broader cityscape as well. So with that, look, I think we might close out the webinar. We've been recording it. We'll share it back by all the various channels which you signed in for, and say once again, thank you so much to all of our speakers. So Rachel from TC Pinpoint, Dan from Conquer, Matt from Eunomia, and Adam from SiteHive. You guys have all been very, very generous with your time, and it looks like from the audience that everybody's quite interested in what you're doing. So I suggest you reach out to them all after the session. So look, thanks all for joining in, and I look forward to seeing you next time.
Thanks, Julian.
Cool.
Thanks, Anna.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.